Thank you, Olaf. And again, thank you for your indulgence. I'm again speaking in place of Andy, though I must confess that this presentation was prepared by both of us. But he is, of course, the better spokesperson for this. This is a short presentation, and we'll give you some of the new work which is being planned, new solutions which one is trying to think through, new initiatives that one is trying to conjure up. So let me, without taking any more time in introduction, get to tell you how we arrive at that, and then tell you the new initiatives. First, we think that there are 6 key shifts underway in the world. And one of the first is that if you really look at last 3 decades, there is now stronger, more visible local and IP organizations. They continue to struggle in some places, but in a number of places they are strong enough to protect, protest, and advance their rights. This comes at a cost, sometimes at the cost of human lives itself, but I do think that the trend in strengthening of the local and IP organizations is clearly visible. Some of the victories which they have achieved in the UN, getting FPIC recognized, UNDRIP being accepted, is one of those. The second trend which we see that there is an emergence of forward-looking companies recognizing the value in securing local land rights. Now, I'm not getting behind the causes as to how it happened, but we can get into it in case somebody asks that particular question. There is a rollback on rights and weakening of environmental standards in some countries and organizations. We can cite the example of Peru, Mexico, and India. Mexico, the question was already asked to David earlier. India, I can personally vouch for some of those things. World Bank recently has really started diluting its safeguard standards. On the other hand, we see that there is a progress on land rights in some countries. DRC has a law coming. There is a constitutional court ruling in Indonesia, and several other countries where the government themselves are initiating 10-year reforms. The NGOs, they are rethinking, repositioning, and one of this will be reflected in some of the new initiatives which we'll be talking about, and searching for opportunities, influence, and scale. And there is some substantial shift in political leadership. Particularly, we see the victory of Joko Widodo in Indonesia as one of greater significance, and the chances of something happening in Brazil and Marina Silva playing an important role. Okay. Now, given these things, how in the world can overseas development assistance respond? The governments and international organizations show a very mixed picture, chaotic, unclear, uncertain, unstable, unpredictable. There is few patterns, many dispersed opportunities, but the 2 trends which do seem to be completely stable over a period of time is the global demand for resources and local demand for justice. And given this mixed picture, we therefore need a strategy at once responsive and nimble to be able to detect, understand, and then formulate a more tailored solutions, more tailored responses to these things, which will be how do we really engage upstream, which is the sources of capital, which is one of the constant, which is one of the things which is more stable in the world. As I said, the global demand of resources is stable, and how do we really engage with the local people, which is the downstream response. Having questioned what ODA should be doing or how ODA should be responding, let me come to the question of what we in RRI think of it and how do we respond to this. In terms of our priorities, we think that it is important that we continue to support and connect local and indigenous organizations and networks. That it is imperative now for us to engage the financial institutions, companies, and supply chains. We do think, and I will present a little bit of statistics on this, that we need to scale up investments in implementing tenure reforms where there are real opportunities. And we will have to get out of our comfort zone and link up with unlikely partners for coordination and to increase the influence and scale up the efforts for the recognition of these rights. I will be speaking about 3 initiatives. This is exactly 3 slides, and one is Interlaken call to action, including working groups, baseline, upcoming conference. We will talk about that. Then we will talk about the private sector Interlaken group, which is upcoming work on company standards. And then lastly, I will talk about the International Land and Forest Tenure Facility. The Interlaken call to action is lots of these large networks realizing that we alone cannot really match the scale of the problem. And therefore, there is a validity and there is a need and there is probably a strategic opportunity to join hands together. And therefore, three large, let's say, networks in the world, International Land Coalition, RRI, and Oxfam, they co-convened a meeting of a number of organizations from the world, and then came to then decided how we are going to be, let's say, coordinating our action on these fronts, and that resulted in creation of 3 working groups. So there is a working group on the global mapping platform, which is co-convened by IBC, WRI, FES, and several other organizations. There is another working group which is working on the issues relating to the conservation, led by Maliasili Initiatives, Natural Justice, and Forest Peoples Program. And there is third working group which has been created, which is on the global processes and SDGs, which is again coordinated by the 4 organizations listed there. So this is the call to action essentially calls for doubling of the area under doubling of the land area under community tenure in the by 2020, and that's the purpose of these organizations coming together to achieve that. The next conference, where they will take a stock of where we are in terms of coordinating our efforts, and where we have really made some gains, where we have not made some gains and not been as effective or influential. That conference will take place next year, October 8 to 9, in Interlaken. The private sector Interlaken group, which is of the leading companies, financial institutions, and NGOs, committed to expanding and leveraging private sector action in securing community land rights. And you can see that there are companies like Coca-Cola, Rio Tinto, Unilever. There are financial institutions like IFC. There are NGOs, Landesa, RRI, Oxfam, the Forest Peoples Program. All sorts of people have joined hands together in this, in developing. I can talk about the entire set of programs which they have developed, including the way they would be able to implement the voluntary guidelines which were accepted by the more than 180 countries in the world. So there are these 5 priority work streams: develop operational guidelines, strategic funding mechanism for tenure, advance transparency, strengthen business case for recognition of tenure, and capacity building and training, so that these can actually be implemented in the field. The last but not the least, this is the last slide. And this time I didn't notice that you showed me the time. Last time I didn't. This is I'm putting it the last, but this is not the least. This is the most exciting initiative that is at the inception phase at the moment, which was announced by Murray in the morning, actually, the CEDA's contribution to this particular initiative. It is called, that may not be the final name, but that's the working name at the moment, which is International Land and Forest Tenure Facility. Basically, we believe that lots of conflicts in the world and lack of progress and the problems of food security and poverty, and also if you really want a genuine solution to the climate change and do believe in justice, then it is important to look at this whole question of the rights of the communities across the world. And it is even more important because the pressure on those resources is going to be increasing, as it is predicted that there is going to be approximately 4 billion people in the middle class by 2050. Now, we do know that there is a greater interest and greater demand for that recognition of community rights, but efforts and commitments are not matching it. If you look at the World Bank's land portfolio, they have invested $900 million for securing community. They have invested $900 million on land portfolio, out of which only 6% is gone to any kind of effort to recognize community land rights. This facility will serve two functions. First is it will provide funding and technical support for tenure reform projects. Now, this is very important to understand that these are the projects which are actually exactly in the middle. It's not the projects of starting the land registries or making the land registries in the world, which is where the institutions like World Bank are better situated. It is also not the projects in which you do the initial, let's say, advocacy work to establish the case of tenure reform, which is the kind of work which RRI and organizations like and our partners do. This is the one in which a middle-level investment of, say, between say, $500,000 to about $5 million will actually change the equation in a particular place in favor of either the communities or the indigenous people or the women or any other vulnerable group. Now, this is also the facility which is not responding to only the governments. This is the facility which will also respond to the community groups, to the indigenous peoples organizations. And that's where it has a very different niche than any other thing which exists at the moment. The second important aspect of this is this will also be a meeting place to coordinate commitments, develop shared strategies to recognize and strengthen collective land rights. There is, as I earlier mentioned, there is an interest in the companies, in the private sector, to look at the risk of insecure tenure, about which my colleague, Mr. Lou Munden, who is present here, will be speaking about just after me. How do we tactically leverage that particular interest into something substantial is what this facility will also be looking at. The last bit, this will also be one of those facilities where the right holders on land and forest will also be in the governance of that particular facility. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.